Now it's my privilege to introduce Dr. K.G. Viswanathan, who is the Vice Dean of the Zarb School of Business. Dr. Viswanathan's research and teaching interests include international finance and banking, corporate finance, international mergers, and international stock listings. He is on the editorial board of the Ames International Journal of Management, and his scholarly articles have appeared in numerous publications, including Applied Financial Economics, the Global Finance Journal, Managerial Finance, and many others. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Viswanathan.
Thank you, Ashira. I join Ashira in welcoming and thanking Laura, Ehsan Nikbat, and Andrew Spieler for putting together this conference. And as Ashira mentioned, we have been doing this for the last 15 years, and I've attended most of those conferences, and it's been really informative and interesting. Let me now introduce the keynote speaker, Ken Baker. He's a good friend of Hofstra. He's been to many of these Breslin real estate conferences, and he's again joining us today as a keynote speaker. Professor Baker is a professor of finance at the Zarb School of Business at American University. He had previously served as the chair of the Department of Finance and Real Estate and as the head of the Finance Center of Excellence. Professor Baker is an award-winning author and editor of 45 books, including several textbooks. He received the 2015 USA Best Book Award in the Personal Finance Investments category for the Psychology of Financial Planning and Investing, and the 2017 Book Excellence Award for the Investment Traps Exposed, Navigating Investor Mistakes and Behavioral Biases. So I'm highlighting these two books because today he's going to be talking about behavioral aspects of real estate markets, and I'm sure he's going to be referring to some of the concepts that are in these books. He has published more than 220 refereed journal articles, several of them in highly regarded journals, including the Journal of Finance, Journal of Corporate Finance, and Harvard Business Review. And his publications have received about 19,000 Google Scholar citations. Professor Baker has consulting and training experience with over 100 organizations, including the American Bankers Association, AT&T, Controller of the Currency, the CFA Institute, and Saudi Aramco. Professor Baker serves on 12 editorial boards of academic journals. He has received many teaching, research, and service awards, including University Scholar Teacher of the Year at American University. The Journal of Finance Literature recognized him as among the top 1% of the most prolific authors in finance during the past 50 years. He was a 2019 Distinguished Scholar of the Southern Finance Association. Professor Baker received his undergraduate degree from Georgetown University, his MBA and DBA from University of Maryland, and several other degrees from American University. So as I mentioned earlier, today Professor Baker is going to share with us his thoughts on behavioral aspects of real estate markets. I look forward to his keynote address. Please join me in welcoming Ken Baker.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being back at Hofstra, if only virtually. I've spent about the last 40 years of my life working in a number of different areas, and one of those areas has been in behavioral finance, largely looking at markets, but today we're going to focus on something a little related to that, markets relating to real estate. So let me go over here and pick this up. So we're looking at the behavioral aspects of real estate. I started out with a couple comments here. And if you take a look at investors in general, we all have biases. And these are called behavioral biases that can influence our decision-making, often in a negative type of fashion. And even though both you and me cannot control the marketplace, as we have certainly seen in the last few days, or actually any time in our history, we can exert control over what we do and the kind of decisions that we make. So we are not in lack of control. One of my favorite quotes is by Benjamin Graham, who said investors' chief problem and even the worst enemy is likely to be himself. So when we take a look at investing, whether or not it's in real estate or stocks or what have you, we have to turn to ourselves and how we're going to manage and deal with that particular area. Benjamin Graham was certainly a sage in that area. So the focus of what I'm going to look at today, I'm going to focus on 10 common behavioral biases that relate to real estate and what, now that's the easy part of it because there are literally hundreds of biases that investors have. Well, what I'm going to, after identifying the bias, I'm going to talk about several potential strategies for real estate investors and what they actually can do to try to mitigate those types of biases. Before that, let's just take a moment to make a comparison between traditional finance, often called standard finance, and behavioral finance. When I was going through various doctoral programs in business, et cetera, and other business programs, as we all have done, often at that time, the emphasis was on traditional finance. And that is that was basically, there was one path that we could go down, that was following the traditional path. However, a number of years ago, another path had developed. It didn't receive the kind of attention that it certainly does today, but is very important, and that is a behavioral path as opposed to a traditional path. So let's just take a look just for a moment to compare briefly the traditional versus the behavioral to make sure that we're all on the same wavelength that takes place. So when we take a look at the two, I've put up some characteristics over on the left-hand side of the screen of looking at that characteristics and what traditional and behavioral finance types, how they view those. And it's a different view. One is not necessarily better than the other. In fact, they are very complementary and can be very helpful combined in trying to make effective decisions. And one of the assumptions that takes place regarding traditional finance is the concept of rationality, that everyone is economically rational, homo economos, as they used to say. That view, I was always concerned about that as I was in my earlier years, and I said, well, sometimes I'm rational and many times I am not. The behavioral finance folks realize that all of us have cognitive limitations. Our emotions often get in the way. We're our own worst enemy. We have a series of biases that influences how we think and the kind of decisions that we make. So these are very, very different types of paths. Under traditional finance, the assumptions of efficient market, the work of Gene Fama. Behavioral advocates realize that markets can be efficient, but they're not always efficient. And they're not always efficient because of the biases and the limitations that we have in decision making. And the purpose of traditional finance is very straightforward. It's normative. It's how we should make decisions. Whereas behavioral finance is more descriptive and talking about how people actually make decisions. We're all human, and as humans, we make mistakes. We have emotions. We have biases that take place that often doesn't lead us the way that, quote, theory says we should. The focus on traditional finance is on mathematical models, statistics, but the orientation initially was from the outside, that is outside of finance and economics, and really started in the area of psychology with works such as Kahneman and Tversky. And then finally, obviously, the traditional finance is a much older field, and behavioral finance is much newer. So given that background, let's take a look at those 10 biases and what potentially we can do about them. And one of the things I'd like you to do as I go through these is to do a little bit of introspection and say, does this particular bias apply to me? And I think you'll probably find that in a number of situations, those biases do. My focus is going to be the impact on real estate investors, but we could apply similar biases to literally any investor in any type of area, whether it's stocks, bonds, or what have you. So let's take a look at the biases that we have over here. There are three major types: cognitive, how we think; emotional, how we feel; and social is the impact of others that will influence our decision making. And among our 10, I'm going to include some cognitive, some emotional, and social biases to spread that, have a little bit of portfolio effect in looking at the biases that are going to occur. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the 10 biases. What is it? And then what can we do to potentially mitigate that? It's one thing to know about a bias. That's the second thing to do something about it. For example, it's one thing to know that we may be overweight or have to change our dietary habits. Another thing is actually to do that. It takes much more work in order to turn our thinking into reality. So the first I want to mention over here is the concepts of anchoring bias. All of these, again, are very common biases relating to the real estate and other areas. When we talk about anchoring, what is it? Well, investors, whether not real estate investors or others, when they're making decisions, they will often refer to an initial reference point. For example, if it's a stock investor, the price that individual paid for the stock and the institution paid for that stock. And by the way, institutional investors are not immune to these. They also have these behavioral biases, but they often tend to be fewer than retail investors for some obvious reasons. If we take a look at a reference point for real estate investors, it could be the price of that particular property that they paid, whether it's a commercial or other type of property, or the perceived value of that. That becomes a point of reference when they're taking a look at potentially selling that particular piece of property. And so what happens is they drop that anchor. That reference point is mentally, it's in their minds, and that influences their particular behavior. And that can lead them to holding on to underperforming properties, especially if the market prices or perceived prices have gone down. So what can we do about this? Well, a couple things. First of all, we can reframe the decision. Instead of simply taking a look at that value of the property and the anchor that was placed on that when it was initially purchased, we need to update that with current market conditions. And this can help us change our perceptions about what the value of that property is. So just because we've anchored from what we paid doesn't mean that's what we're going to get. And that's going to be a data-based. Instead of dealing with emotions, we deal with decisions based upon market analysis, looking at comparable properties, looking at future projections rather than relying upon simply our own personal history and dealing with that particular piece of property and the sentiment, our views that we have regarding that particular property. Very common. One of the most common biases that we have that frankly affects many people, institutional investors alike, is a situation of overconfidence bias. It's great to be confident in our ability. What's dangerous is becoming overconfident. And so what can happen with overconfidence is we tend to overstate our ability. We think that we are better than we really are, sort of a natural tendency. We tend to overestimate what the property value is. And as a consequence, that can lead us to taking on excessive risk and having unrealistic expectations regarding that particular property because we have the ability, the experience, the background to determine what that is. So what can we do? Well, I put up this little diagram over here just to illustrate overconfidence bias. As we look over to the left, I'm right. I know I'm right. I'm really, really sure I'm right. Really sure, really, really, really sure I'm right. Well, I'm pretty sure anyway. That's when the reality starts kicking in when you're getting new data or new perspectives on a particular piece of property or an asset. So how can we overcome this? Well, we can obviously follow principles of Harry Markowitz of not putting all of our eggs in the same basket, or putting them in the same investment. and try to overreduce that. Warren Buffett made a comment years ago, there are two ways to invest. One is to diversify, the classical traditional approach of Markowitz and others, and the other is to invest in a few eggs and really watch those eggs. That's what Buffett largely has done, and he's done pretty well over the years. We can also check out our expectations and our knowledge by seeking advice from others, other real estate professionals, analysts, financial advisors. They can provide a different view. When we only rely upon ourselves, we can become insular and, again, not see the bigger picture, which I'll talk about as another bias in a few moments. And another thing that's very important is to, when I talk about education, it doesn't necessarily have to be formal education, but from a practical point of view, to stay up to date on market trends, different types of economic conditions, which will give us a better understanding that can exceed our own.
Yes, I was very upset yesterday when I heard that he really was not doing well, period. Definitely feel better about things today.
If everyone could make sure they're muted, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Number 3 is confirmation bias. Well, what does that mean? I put a little diagram over here on the right-hand side when we talk about our own personal beliefs that we may have, for example, towards a piece of property. And we have certain, but there are certain facts and evidence that may not be considered consistent with those particular beliefs. And what many scientific studies have shown, both in the physical sciences and the natural sciences, is that we tend to ignore information that doesn't confirm our beliefs. Think about politics. I won't speak much about that, but on politics, people will often gravitate to news channels or other type of media that basically confirms their belief, as opposed to providing additional views that could help them change their perspective. So confirmation bias is going to relate to our pre-existing beliefs and to ignore things that contradict what our views are. This is pretty natural, and that's why it's a bias that takes place. We all have certain biases. We all have certain pre-existing beliefs, and we like to reinforce those because we like to be right. I put this little diagram up here. Over on the left-hand side, you can see the line that is forming for comforting lies, not much for the unpleasant truths when things are inconsistent with our own beliefs that we have. So what do we do about this kind of bias, this confirmation? Well, take a quick example over here. Let's say we have a person on the real estate side that is looking at a neighborhood and they believe that it's going to experience growth. What will typically happen when news comes out about that, they will tend to give greater weight or focus more on the positive news that reinforces their views, as opposed to those that is going to be inconsistent. For example, it could be an area that was once a lovely area, but now it has increasing crime rates or infrastructure problems, and the tendency is to basically ignore those at our own peril. So one of the things is to take a look at a contrarian view. What are people saying about that particular area? What are their perspectives? How do they support those with other kind of evidence? And by taking a look at a contrarian view, sort of the devil's advocate view that's often done in debates, we can gain a better understanding, a more well-rounded view of that opportunity, as opposed to looking at our biases. And other things that we can do to try to counteract these biases is to have a data-based decision as opposed to an emotional-based decision. We'll talk more about some examples of emotional biases in a few moments. Look at different types of valuation reports, rental data, historical performance, and others that will potentially counteract our subjective feelings. well, I believe this, but I don't really have much data to provide to support it, is a dangerous position to be in. One of the most famous experiments that was done in years past by Kahneman and Tversky, two psychologists and really early beginners of the behavioral finance movement, was the concept of loss aversion. Whereas in standard finance, we believe that information was basically symmetrical. And we had a situation that if we had a loss or a gain, the $1,000 loss would be equivalent to $1,000 of a gain, and how we felt towards that. And what many experiments have shown is that simply is not the case. And look at our own personal experience. We certainly get pleasure from having a successful real estate investment, making X amount of dollars on that investment. But I can almost assure you that if you had that same number, but it was a negative, that the pain that you would feel and the pain that I would feel from that particular loss is going to be substantially greater than the same dollar amount of same pleasure you would get from that same dollar amount of gain. And research has shown that basically $1 of gain is going to equivalent about to $2 that's going to take place in a loss. So losses have a much more prominence in the way that we think and view investments than the gains that we have. And that really brings us to what is this particular fear. So we have the fear of a loss is more intense than the pleasure of the gains. And so you say, so what? What's going to happen if we have that greater emphasis on the loss, even though that may not be out in the open? It's going to lead many investors to holding on to losing properties. They hold on to too long and they sell the losses that might not particularly be rational. So as a consequence, you'll often find people will wait. Go down to the next point over here. The concept of get-even-itis. So you paid X number of thousands or millions of dollars for a particular piece of property, or you take a stock, paid $50 for a stock, and now the market has dropped, and that stock is showing a market price of 25. Many people will hold on to those particular losers, wanting it or hoping that that particular price will come back to the initial amount that they paid. And of course, that can be very, very dangerous because the entire market and the economic situation may have changed, and they may not be able to get even for a long, long time, if ever. So how do we overcome that? Well, one of the approaches is can be strategy based. That is, we can decide under what kind of conditions that we would sell a property. For example, what particular price would we be willing to sell, or what loss level would we sell? This can, by setting that more specific exit strategy with a piece of property, this can begin to take out at least some of the emotional attachment that we see with the losses. Nobody likes to say, oh, I bought a losing stock or I bought a losing property, but in reality, those occur. Another factor is to focus upon our long-term goals rather than simply the short-term losses or gains. Long-term financial planners and looking at the market today, especially with the great volatility and the losses that have occurred in the last week plus or last several weeks, basically say these are ripples in the water that will take place. If you're focusing on your long-term goal, which is going to be retirement, that could make great sense. However, if that long-term goal happens to be next week, or it's coming up next week for retirement, that could be a very, very different kind of story. Another very common bias that takes place is that we place emphasis on more recent events and more information that has occurred. And this is what is known as recency bias. We give more weight to recent market trends or short-term data. And one of the reasons for that is we make an assumption that this is going to be more realistic and that it's going to continue into the future. So how can we try to overcome that particular situation of that recency? Well, we can take a look at longer term data that's going to occur, take a look at different types of cycles to give us a better sense of that type of behavior, because we do see markets, both real estate markets and stock markets and bond markets, move in cycles over time. And if we understand that situation of those types of cycles, this can help provide some resistance to making decisions, as many people are making now on the market. What am I going to do that we've had these drops in this particular markets? It can help slow that particular decision-making process and taking a look at the longer term data and really what are the objectives that one has, not simply what is a knee-jerk reaction to dramatic news that's occurring in the marketplace. One of the three different types of biases, most of which we've looked at so far, have been the cognitive biases and also the emotional biases. We also have biases that relate to social, that is how other people around us, or how society as a whole, or our people in our community, not necessarily the community where we live, but investing community that would take place, can influence our behavior. And this is what is known as herd mentality. It's following the crowd, investing in the same markets or the same properties and others. And also, often this is driven by a fear that is known as FOMO, fear of missing out. You see, the market is, in the past, has often moved up rather dramatically over longer periods of time. And people look and say, well, gee, I don't want to miss out on that particular. I'm going to jump into that market without really doing the sound kind of analysis that really would be required for that kind of decision. Little cartoon that's shown over here with familiar with lemmings jumping off the cliff. I don't know where we're going, but from the look of this crowd, it's got to be good. Well, not necessarily following the crowd is a good thing to do. Because, however, some psychological research shows that many of us are wired or programmed to feel that the consensus view must be correct. Many times the minority view is going to be much more relevant, much more data-based than simply following the crowd. So obviously we can run into great difficulties of doing marketplaces, of getting in at the tops of bubbles and then having the bubble burst. So instead of following others and doing what everybody else is doing, focus on your own research, and through research of very respected members within the community. Take a look at the fundamentals, look at the long-term sustainability of that property or that particular area. Assess factors such as infrastructure, what's happening, what is on the map to occur, what's occurring with job growth or population trends, movements that have taken place out of California to Texas and Florida, for example. One of my favorite examples, because it rings true, which is known as the endowment effect. And I'm not talking about university endowments or other types of endowments. I'm talking about if you happen to own a piece of property or a stock. What I show over on the right-hand side are some cups. And there's a very famous experiment that's being done that if you happen, let's say you're going to a school and you happen to be an alumnus and you have a cup from one of my schools, the Georgetown or the University of Maryland, versus someone that simply has a cup that doesn't have that kind of affiliation or connection with that. And someone asks, what are you willing to take for that particular cup? What you'll generally find is that the folks who have a connection with that institution, that particular property, will look at that piece of property, in this particular example, the cup, as being more valuable than people who don't have that kind of connection. That's what is known as the endowment effect. It's a tendency to overvalue an asset on something that we own. Think about a car that you may own. it often is much more valuable to you, or something that has been left to you in an estate by a relative. It has that emotional connection. It's much more valuable to you, to others, because you own it and you have some sentimental attachment to that particular piece of property. It may well be, however, that over time, that particular piece of property that has been left to you, or that particular asset, it no longer fits your particular goals. An example of the endowment effect is shown in this lemonade stand example, where someone is selling lemonade and the lemonade is 5 cents, yet on the bottom, business for sale, asking $1 million. Well, why the $1 million for this lemonade stand? Well, our growth rate supports the valuation. Well, again, there's an attachment to that personal feeling, that sentiment, that makes that more valuable. And that can be dangerous, because if that's the case, often we have a situation of holding on to that property too long. So what do we need to do? Objectively assess that property, regularly evaluate, look at its potential, try to stand away from that emotional attachment. Remember, in standard finance, there are no emotions, sort of like a Dr. Spock-like situation. But in reality, our emotions are very much connected to many of the decisions that we make. So if we set performance metrics for various benchmarks that we're looking at, for example, a return on investment or certain cash flows that will be generated by that particular property, that can help take out some of the emotions. 3 more to go. Another area that we have over here is what is known as availability bias. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you take a look at availability bias, it talks about what information is over on the left-hand side, what information is readily available that you have used in order to make your decision. That information that you and I have about that particular piece of property is only a small piece of the information that is involving that particular property, or what is happening around that particular property. So we tend to migrate towards information that is easy to come across, and that's what the availability bias has. It's readily available, it is memorable, it has an impact, rather than taking a look at a more comprehensive look and having to dig more deeply into the investment to see whether or not it really is attractive. In other words, trying to remove that simply looking at the service. So an example, if a friend tells you about a new property that is a hot new property, you might rush to consider investing in that without conducting the appropriate due diligence that would be necessary for that particular property, simply because that information has come from a friend and it happens to be readily available. The other information may require considerable digging. So looking at different information sources can give us a broader range of data. Looking at different market reports, expert advice, financial models, again, looking in more comprehensively as opposed to single pieces of data that happen to be readily available. Check that information. Certainly is true today when we hear the information about false news. There is false news about properties and other kind of real estate investments. So we want to look at data in which our information is going to be very reliable information as opposed to hearsay. Another very popular bias over here is called familiarity bias. This really relates to our, as you see over on the right-hand side, to our comfort zone. We all feel comfortable within a certain range. Some of our comfort zones are much wider than others. And sometimes we need to step out of that comfort zone in order to find properties and investments that are going to really be relevant to our goals and our portfolios. So familiarity properties are those within our comfort zone. We feel comfortable about those. We're more knowledgeable about those. And this could keep us away looking within our comfort zone to ignoring properties that are much more lucrative. In stocks, this is often called, in stock investing, it's called home bias. So if you look at your portfolios, I would make a small wager that the greatest percentage of your investment are in U.S. stocks if you happen to be in the United States. There are some, obviously that's ignoring all of the potential benefits that could take place through global investments and global diversification. So we need to step out of our comfort zone to be wise investors. We need to expand our horizons into different kinds of markets. And I'm not talking necessarily emerging markets globally. It could be an emerging market within a particular state or region or that would take place. And again, it's important to conduct that kind of analysis that's going to be objective based in order to try to reduce those personal types of biases that we are going to have. And number 10, last but not least, is a very famous concept known as mental accounting. And what I've done over here is to put a little example over on the left-hand side to show 6 different jars. And each one of these jars relates to some type of personal event. For example, our pension, our housing, our medical needs, college education for ourselves or for our children, vacation, and the miscellaneous. And what happens is we look at the money that is in these jars as meaning different types of things. That is, $1 in a vacation is treated differently than $1 in pensions or $1 in college funds or $1 in medical. $100 in your left pocket is worth exactly the same as $100 in your right pocket. Dollars are very fungible to take place. So when we treat money differently, even though it means exactly the same thing, $1 is $1, this can lead to very irrational types of decisions. For example, treating profits from one property as extra money to splurge on some other kind of luxury property instead of reinvesting it. Looking at dollar, that's a windfall from a stock to go on a frivolous spending spree, again, is a very dangerous thing in order to do. So what do? Well, we want to take a look and treat our funds holistically, not separate out those particular stocks. $1 return from a stock is not going to be any different from $1 return from a bond that's going to occur, ignoring taxes, of course, that's taking place. So we want to take our profits that we have and reinvest those in appropriate kinds of ways and think about balancing and reinvesting those. And this is going to be done in order to meet our very clear financial goals. Always have your goals in mind. Why are you making these particular investments? What are those particular allocations of the dollars that you're having? And you want those to align with your goals. And again, not let the emotions get into place just because you have placed those in a different bucket or in a different jar, those dollars. So in summary, we've got 3 general strategies. I've referred to some more specific strategies related to each of the biases, but let me just touch upon these briefly. It's important to have a framework. What are the guidelines for selecting properties? What are your performance benchmarks? What are your exit strategies? These should be developed in advance. You do need, of course, to have some flexibility because circumstances can change, but you need to have a framework, a solid framework to avoid biased decision-making. You need to regularly review that portfolio. What was right 6 months ago or even 6 days ago may not necessarily be right. And it's appropriate to rebalance those underperforming assets in your holdings that you may have. And also step outside of that comfort zone and get additional opinions that would take place, expert advice from agents, experts in the field, mentors that you may have be working with that can provide you with that objective advice that will help you to avoid the subjective emotions that often come within investing. So as a conclusion, Understanding and recognizing our behavioral biases that we all have can help us become real estate investors that are going to be more rational and making more informed decisions and avoiding those kinds of mistakes and common pitfalls that I've just mentioned. Let's leave with a Warren Buffett quote. We don't have to be smarter than the rest. We simply have to be more disciplined than the rest. Warren Buffett has never claimed that he's the smartest person in the room, but he probably is one of the most disciplined persons in the room. And let the music play for a moment.
Laura?
You'll have to pardon me, I'm a musician in my spare time. So I think I managed my time fairly well over here, but let me just see if there's a couple questions and then we'll move on with the program.
So actually, Ken, let me get started then. So, Maximilian, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Baker. What do you think the hardest bias to overcome is and why, of the 10 biases that you mentioned?
Well, those are all personal. You know, that's saying it's almost like asking which is your favorite child. It largely depends, but let me just make a couple comments that would take. I've tried to identify those that would be really top biases that would occur. For some individual, one of the most dangerous ones out of that particular list would be overconfidence. And I say that because, as I say, we all have strong backgrounds, educations, experiences that take place. That's important. And we've had our successes, we've had our failures. Hopefully we've learned from our mistakes. I know certainly I have made many mistakes and tried to, I say nothing wrong with making mistakes as long as you don't repeat them. But I would say for many individuals that overconfidence, especially professionals, and professionals tend in their field to be overconfident, often overconfident. And as a consequence, that can lead them astray in their investment decision making. The others, I would have you look at any of those 10 and say, which of those rang true with you the most? And that would really answer your question individually. But it really is a very personal type of thing to occur on the bias. But it's an excellent question. But to answer your question, I'm not like a politician. I'll answer it. I would say overconfidence, especially if you're a professional investor.
Thank you.
Zarb, you're next.
Yes, hi. I'm Seb Hirakian. I'm with Professor Spieler. I just had a question about the overconfidence bias. Overconfidence is pretty subjective. It could vary with anyone. Is there any real clear benchmark that can really be laid out for an overconfidence?
Well, there are ways that overconfidence can be measured. Often they are done on a scalar, a Likert type of scale. For example, you can, let's say that you're in an office setting doing investments that are occurring. You could have someone evaluate themselves, but that self-evaluations often tend to be very biased because we think we are better. So it is better to go from the outside of people looking in who have familiarity with someone's actions. For example, can you think about someone that you think is overconfident?
Probably some of my friends.
Doesn't have to be in the investment side.
Yeah, definitely some of my friends. Sometimes I think they're a little bit overconfident. Mainly when we just
You have a little bit overconfident, greatly overconfident, and maximum overconfident, and not overconfident at all. And so if we did have a group of people looking at whatever friend or friends that you were looking that were overconfident, we could come up with a scalar and have them evaluate. I do a lot of survey research, which basically means gathering primary data of going to decision makers, whether or not they're corporate decision makers or what have you. And we use a lot of scalars scalar instruments in order to try to identify one's perception or views or opinions that would take place. Pollsters do the same thing. So yes, there are scalar instruments that are used to measure confidence. Do they have margins of error? The answer is absolutely yes. But we can live with a degree of uncertainty and have those some margins of errors.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Look, and this is more of a comment rather than a question. So for many of the strategies that you had recommended, you had actually recommended that we try to get more information and try to inform ourselves about what's happening. But there's so much information out there that one concern, one thought that came to my mind is that this could lead to analysis paralysis, where you'll keep searching for information, and the good investment opportunity might pass you by. So, any comment on that, or how can we be confident that we have all the right information?
Well, you never have all the right information because there's always more today. But it's a good question to have. I guess what is the difference between we take a look at the different organizations and individuals, and classically we talk about organizations being profit maximizers, even though there's obviously very different views regarding that. We also have individuals who try to maximize their own profits, however they may define that. But also you have others that are satisficer. And satisfaction comes from the Greek word satis, which means enough. So answer your question, how much is enough information? It's not all there is, because in many cases it would be too costly, and it could certainly lead to paralysis by analysis. But that largely is a subjective opinion on how much is enough. And what may be enough for one person may differ from someone else. I don't think there is a right answer to your question.
Yes. Right. Matthew, you want to go?
Hi. How much do you think we have to uncover in this field, and what do you think we have yet to uncover?
Go through that first part again. I'm going to turn up my volume on my.
How much do you think we have to uncover in terms of like the field of behavioral finance?
Well, it goes back 50 plus years that takes place. And obviously you had much more growth in identifying different anomalies in marketplace that took place 50 years ago. And there were many things that were uncovered. How much is there left to go? Well, on the 17th of March, the University of Maryland is going to initiate the Baker Center on Behavioral Finance. And the hope is that that particular center, as well as others around the country, will continue to discover these kinds of not only biases, but the area of behavioral finance decades into the future. Is there anything that can be added to the information on standard finance? Well, if we take a look at journals, there's never been a time in which we didn't have more publication or more journals in the finance field. And the same is true in behavioral finance. So as long as there are rewards that will take place for, whether those be psychic awards or awards that are going to take place with research institutions or colleges, there will be new discoveries that will take place that will occur in behavioral finance as new discoveries that will take place in traditional finance, and new discoveries that will take place in medicine. I don't see the end to the horizon, certainly while I'm living. and hopefully long past then.
Thank you.
And a quick follow-up to that. So I'm not very familiar with the real estate research, the literature in that, but I'm more familiar with the traditional finance literature. How much behavioral real estate research has been done is out there right now?
A fraction compared to other areas and looking at markets.
Mhm. Okay.
That's why I chose this particular topic.
Mm.
To give a little bit of insight. The behavioral biases are the same. I mean, confirmation bias is confirmation bias. Anchoring bias is anchoring bias, but they have different context. And basically what you find in so many areas is the applications tend to be applied in, well, why do the applications occur basically in stock markets? Well, largely because obviously huge marketplaces, but there frankly is much more written about stock markets than there is real estate markets that will generally take place.
Hmm.
What will happen over time is that you'll get a wave. People will, on the research side, will jump on the bandwagon, if I can use that term, and start doing that particular research. And then what happens, the area gets flooded. And it becomes very difficult or more difficult to get that kind of research. I'm talking about market anomalies, for example. It was a big deal when the efficient market hypothesis just came out in the mid-70s. And much of the work, the behavioral finance work, focused on identifying anomalies that were inconsistent with standard finance. But after that particular area becomes flooded with research, what people do is to say, can these concepts be applied other places? For example, real estate. And the answer is yes. Are they going to be identical? The answer is no. There'll be a lot of similarities, but there'll be differences. So I would say, for example, if you look at behavioral finance on traditional markets versus behavioral finance in real estate markets, there's much more opportunity of publication in the real estate side, even given fewer journals on the real estate side.
Kent, this is Brian Lee from Newmark. I've been in the real estate business for approximately 40 years, so been around the block a few times through a few cycles. And have you taken into account, in real estate, tax implications are so dramatic because of the capital gains tax and depreciation and cost basis. So when someone's looking to sell a property, that becomes a significant factor in addition to all of the other factors that you say that might be different than stocks or bonds or other type of investing. So have you taken that into account when you look at these other factors?
Well, taxes in many cases in real estate, since you've been in that business a long time, are often the tail that wag the dog. In the sense they are so important in so many real estate kinds of transactions. We cannot ignore or should not ignore the situation of taxes in any type of corporate investment or other type of stock investment that's going to take place, because the tax laws come into place with carry forwards, difference between short-term and long-term. Looking at differences, for example, between $1 in debt and $1 in dividends. They're not worth the same in the U.S. Because of the taxes, and the same thing is true with real estate. So real estate, depending upon your locality, that can become more and more and more important, given your both federal and local laws that would take place. So obviously should be taken in consideration. And by the way, the early models, as you probably know, and taking a look at corporate finance or investments, they assumed away such little items, and I put this in quotes, they assumed away such little items as taxes and transaction costs, just to show how the model would work. Famous Modigliani and Miller models, those types of things. But real estate taxes, exceptionally important.
Thank you.
Any more questions? We have time for just one last question, if there are any.
Hi there, Kent. It's Andrew.
Andrew.
Great to see you virtually.
Yes.
So I do have a question, but before my question, I just want to take another moment to really thank you so much for taking the time and putting together this thoughtful presentation and really bringing together two streams of the literature. Now, my question, and no pun intended, I'm a little bit biased here towards both behavioral finance and real estate based on my research interests. In fact, I think our first collaboration many years ago was for one of your real estate books. So we've kind of come full circle here, Kent. And my question is this: given that real estate is an investment which could require much more active management, as opposed to just trying to identify an undervalued stock, do you think there's one of those biases that might be more important, just based on the fact that real estate direct ownership would require more active management? And I look forward to your response, and thank you again so much for joining us.
I would say, looking at the 10 biases that we dealt with on the active management side, would be familiarity. Because if you are more of an active manager, which is certainly the case in many types of real estate types of investments, you need to be very familiar with the nature of the property, the taxes that were mentioned, the laws, the regulations, what's happening in crime, what's happening in infrastructure in that particular area. So I would say familiarity bias, or at least familiarity with the particular type of property that you're dealing with. Again, you can be at a much more of an arm's length type of investor as a stock investor than many cases if you're dealing with real estate. However, if you have funds in a REIT, then your level of hands-on is much different than if you're managing a property itself, obviously.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and for sharing all your thoughts about some of the behavioral biases that could exist in real estate. Please join me in applauding, thanking Ken.
Thank you very much. Appreciate very much being back virtually at Hofstra again and seeing such well-known faces on the screen.
Hopefully the next one will be in person. So we're hoping that will be the case. Thank you again. And okay, let me turn it over to Michael. Michael, please.
Thank you, KG. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Zhou, and I will be the moderator for this panel discussion. So we have a fantastic lineup of 5 excellent speakers who will share their insights about real estate technology. So each speaker will give a brief presentation lasting about 10 minutes. After all the presentations, we will open the floor for a Q&A session. We kindly request that you hold your questions until all our speakers have spoken. So with that, let's get started. So our first speaker is Mr. Paul Cheng. Mr. Cheng is the Senior Investment Officer and Head of Real Estate at a Midwest-based public pension plan, managing $3.5 billion, including $2.1 billion in institutional real estate. He previously worked as an investment officer at CalPERS, responsible for underwriting key partnerships across real estate and infrastructure. Before that, he spent nearly 10 years as the public equity analyst in sectors like mining, renewables, and technology at top-tier investment banks. Mr. Cheng is also an active personal real estate investor and a former licensed realtor. He holds a degree from University of South Carolina's Marshall School of Business and has earned CFA, CAIA, and CCIM credentials. Paul, welcome. You have 10 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm aiming to share. Can you see the presentation?
Not yet.
Could see it now, yes.
Yeah, it's
okay, you can see it. Great. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for Professor Andrew Spieler for inviting me. So I have a short presentation, and so we'll move to slide number 2. So just a little bit about me as the introduction said, I used to be on the listed equity side, and I wanted to mention that because basically, essentially halfway through my financial industry services career, I pivoted to private markets. And when I look at kind of like the roller coaster ride in the stock markets. I'm kind of glad that I pivoted to private markets where assets are valued, on a quarterly basis, don't have to deal with that up and down emotional roller coaster. At the bottom, there's one particular credential that I highlighted, not in any way to highlight a credential. I do these things more just for my own benefit, but when I pivoted from listed equities to private markets, I had to essentially retool myself, and there were a number of certificates that I got, and one of them is the one highlighted CCIM, Certified Commercial Investment Member. And so I think for individuals, for those of you who are earlier in your career or who are still in school, you decide to pursue a career in commercial real estate, that could be something that you may want to evaluate and determine whether that makes sense. It's a pretty comprehensive program. So it's just something to consider for those of you who do decide to pursue a career in commercial real estate. So today, what I wanted to do was just to provide a very high level primer on real estate, on commercial real estate. And I thought I'd start with just kind of very basic real estate property types. In the past, there were really 4 or 5 major property types, and that's kind of offices, buildings where we work, retail, where we shop, at both malls as well as grocery anchor centers, residential, and residential obviously where we live, but there's different types of residential. There's apartments, high rises, garden style, single family detached homes, manufactured housing, student housing, senior housing. These are all places where we live. Industrial, which has been the darling of the commercial real estate industry for the past decade or so. These are warehouses and last minute storage places where our retailers store their goods, and also e-commerce players like Amazon used to ship. And partly because of the pandemic, as well as just a shift to online shopping, industrial has just been very strong over the past 10 years. Data centers, another newer property type that has taken high prominence, especially during the pandemic, because that allowed us to work remotely. Life science, where drug discovery occurs. Medical offices, where we see our physicians and healthcare providers. Hotels/hospitality, where we stay when we're traveling. And self-storage, where we tend to store things. Now, there are other smaller, maybe more niche property types, but these are kind of some of the more major ones I wanted to touch on. So this is one slide where, if you think about kind of like the different property types that I highlighted, there are different drivers depending on which property type you're looking at. I think almost all of them are somehow impacted by population growth for fairly obvious reasons. There are other property types, like for example, in the third bullet, job growth, that certainly impacts offices. If jobs are not created, then employers have less need for office space. And another one I want to touch on is household formation. For a number of you in the kind of attending this, it seems like you guys are in, many of you are in college or graduate school, but once you start entering into your 20s and 30s, you get settled, you settle down, maybe get married, and that's when you kind of start thinking about starting a family and having kids, and usually that's when people start moving out of apartments and start considering single family homes. So for a property type like single family homes, household formation is actually a key driver. I mentioned self-storage. These are, just kind of empty box of space where you store your personal goods when you're in transition. This property type actually has been really impacted by high interest rates. Self-storage really depends on, a big driver for self-storage is movement. You need people to move. When people are moving because they're buying homes, they're getting divorces, there's certain events happening in their own life. That's when they need storage, right? So there are certain property types that are driven by maybe less economic drivers, more just kind of lifestyle event, as well as life events. So this is kind of like an elaboration of the last slide, where I borrowed a graphic from the CCIM Institute. And it kind of like touches on the different drivers. And for certain property types, like for example, industrial, which is on the right-hand side, that's impacted by population, employment, as well as just shopping trends, shopping preferences, as well as the supply chain trends. So this is kind of like a chart that you can use to kind of like, understand the different demand drivers for different property types. So we'll spend on the next slide, slide number 6. We'll spend a little bit of time on this. So again, I borrowed this from the CCIM Institute in one of the literature. This is a very valuable tool, just this kind of like chart in terms of like assessing a real estate investment. So, there's a rectangle in the middle, and there's a number of oval shapes around the rectangle. And we'll kind of start with the one on top, one, market and competitive analysis. When we look at kind of commercial real estate, when we look at an opportunity, we always want to start with, it's ultimately about the asset, but I think at one high level type of analysis we want to conduct is to understand the marketplace, right? For example, let's say we're looking at apartments in New York City. We want to look at just very basic economic drivers, supply, demand, absorption. Is there an oversupply of apartments? Is there an undersupply? Are there a lot of people moving into New York City for new jobs, for school? We want to kind of understand that. We want to understand like population, job growth. Just get a pretty good sense of the environment. Now, for different property types, that market analysis may be a little bit different, but you always want to just have like an understanding of just a kind of high level market environment. Now, you guys may have heard of the phrase, when it comes to assessing real estate, it's all about location, 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 right? And so that's what number 2 is all about, location and site analysis. For those, and since Hofstra, I believe, is a suburb of New York City, if you think about just kind of Manhattan itself, just Manhattan is an island, but yet, if you go within just a couple of blocks, the market dynamics are very different, right? So you want to kind of look at the sub-market, within a few blocks of a property type, whether it's an apartment, whether it's an office, or different types. Things like amenities like transport, proximity to a subway station, to public transportation, access to retail centers, restaurants and whatnot. So you want to kind of look at the site. And then at the asset level, you want to understand kind of the age of the asset, how old, if it's an older building, has it been renovated within the last 5-10 years? What sort of CapEx is required? Just kind of looking at the decor, for offices, our preference for offices has changed. And in New York City itself, if you really think about it, a vast majority of the office stock was built probably, in the 1920s to 1950s. So a lot of those are, by modern standards, by the needs of the modern workplace, they're a little bit outdated, especially for those that have not been renovated within the last 10-20 years. So you want to think about the asset quality, kind of the age and the condition. So number 3, political and legal analysis. The last speaker, Professor Baker, I think was asked a question about taxes, and that's a very important question, topic to consider. Kind of like one would be just kind of the tax environment, right? Zoning. Right now we have a glut in offices, and I think for some of that oversupply to be worked through, probably local and federal governments will have to provide some sort of like tax abatement, tax subsidies, tax incentives for developers to come in and essentially create like a new basis for some of these projects to be redeveloped. So trying to understand the tax environment as well as like the zoning, kind of like just the political environment as it relates to real estate. And then lastly, financial analysis at the asset level. Think about like kind of the occupancy of the building, rent growth, the tenant profile. Is the tenant creditworthy? In kind of real estate, you want to like conduct like a tenant profile analysis, a credit analysis, trying to understand how strong are they, right? As well, you want to look at the leverage. What sort of leverage would you need to assume, and what sort of leverage, interest rate level, and debt, loan to value level for an asset. So let's move on to number 7.
Yeah, Paul, you have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So real estate has been very challenging over the past few years. I think partly because of higher interest rates. But then what I've provided here is a graph over the past 10 years, and you'll see that there were a number of market recessions that's represented by the gray bars, and each of those market corrections were followed by strong returns of 8 to 12% of 13% in the subsequent period. So, and what we're seeing in the commercial market real estate is that we've seen, I would argue that values have bottomed in most cases, and that we could be in for a period of kind of mid-single digit returns for core types, and for certain other types of projects, there could be opportunities for high single digits, low double digit returns. And lastly, we have like a forecast for different returns. It's provided by CBRE. And what they do is every quarter they provide an update on or their forecasts for expected returns for the different property types. And for them, they expect modern logistics, manufactured housing, and data centers to post the strongest returns in the next 5-7 years. And on the opposite end, legacy office, life science, and malls expected to have the weakest returns in coming years. So I'll stop there. I know I was supposed to take questions, but in case anyone wanted to make a quick comment, be happy to address that.
Thank you, Paul. Our next speaker is Mr. Andrew Cohen. Mr. Cohen is the founder of Liberty Group Holdings, launched in 2015 to acquire and manage distressed residential properties in Baltimore and nearby areas. Starting with no corporate capital and $155,000 from friends and family, he grew the company from urban walkout buildings to larger garden-style and high-rise complexes across Baltimore and Washington, D.C. To date, he's managed over $150 million in assets, including 675 apartments and 80,000 square feet of retail space. Andrew holds a BA degree from Suffolk University and an MBA degree in finance and real estate from Hofstra. Andrew, you have 10 minutes for a presentation. Welcome.
All right, let me get my screen up here for everybody. There we go. Can we see the Liberty Springs apartments?
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome, great. So yeah, my name is Andrew Cohen. I'm the founder of Liberty Group Holdings, now based here in Washington, D.C. I focus mostly on garden-style apartment complexes these days, generally with a value-add component. My markets are Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and previously Washington, D.C. So the DC part dovetails into this presentation because we had about 250 apartment units here in DC, and due to overregulation and tenant laws, I decided to exit the municipality. So selling a 126 unit building finally in January of 2024 after a 4-year sales process. I then had about, I think it was $5 million in 1031 money to exchange into a new complex. So I found this gem here, and it is now called the Liberty Springs Apartments, and previously it was 2 separate apartment complexes that were directly adjacent to each other. So I might get a little PTSD here because I probably gave this presentation or something similar about 100 times last summer when I was raising capital, but I'll take you through it. So this is a 152 unit garden style complex in Dundalk, Maryland. So Dundalk is typically a lower income area. It's where Bethlehem Steel used to be, and it's also where there's a bunch of container terminals and ports. It is to the east of Baltimore City by about 1 mile. And what we did here was I identified 2 separate apartment complexes directly adjacent to each other. One was 64 units and one was 88 units. And somehow the owners of the complexes didn't know about each other and never spoke to each other. So instead of going directly to them, I went to a recognized local broker and said, hey, I need you to get these guys to sell to me. So what we did was the broker negotiated with them and with myself, and we signed contracts to buy the properties on the same day and went hard with a $600,000 deposit before conducting any due diligence. I realize how insane that sounds, but I had known enough about these assets that going over leases and utilities and rent rolls was a secondary concern. So then the other interesting part of this deal is that the two parcels were assessed at $9 million in value. Well, I was buying them for $13,000, so that means my taxes were going to go up $50,000 a year. So there's this little wrinkle in the Maryland code where if you buy the equity interest of a business entity for less than $1 million, there is no mortgage, or excuse me, there's no recording costs, and then there's also no real estate tax reassessments. So instead of buying one or two parcels, we subdivided the whole thing into 14 parcels, bought the membership interest, and kept our taxes down to $9 million instead of $13 million. So by saving that $50,000 a year, that adds up to something like $700,000 in the value of my property. So we also did an equity syndication, raising additional money, and then secured a $9.5 million loan to acquire this asset. So I'll take you through a couple of the things I look for here and what made this transaction interesting to me. First of all, I generally focus on Class B and C+ type assets. I'm not competing with the REITs, the institutions, the pension funds, and you're generally getting a higher yield going in. When the market really heats up, as it did in 21 and 22, they sell for the same cap rates as Class A properties do. This type of property had an average cap rate of about 3.75% to 4% in early 2022, and that's when Class A+ buildings were selling at. So if I can get a discount on the basis and still sell it for the same price later on, I think I have the opportunity to do better. The characteristics of this that made it interesting for me was that there's a lot of growing demand for workforce housing in this area. There's zero new supply growth. So all the land in this area is built on. You can't build anything new. And you have Trade Point Atlantic, which is an old industrial hub that is now being transformed into a logistics center. And they've added 15,000 jobs in the last 12 years, and they have plans to add another 15,000 jobs. So those people all have to live somewhere. That has created 4.5% average annual income in this submarket for the last 15 years. I think that's pretty good. And these are also the type of jobs where a hedge fund or a corporate can't just pick up and move to Dallas or Miami. These are people on the ground going to factories every day, and they can't really be displaced by deciding to move. I'm also looking to capitalize on what I think are some thematic tailwinds in CRE. There's declining new supply because interest rates are elevated, so people can't afford to build new buildings, and the numbers don't pencil anymore. This could lead to lower replacement costs. Hopefully, this will also lead to lower insurance costs, and the combination of the three, I think, could create a lot of value. And then the other main driver of this deal, and also the vicinity, is the Port of Baltimore. So we've got the Dundalk Logistics Terminal, the Seagirt Marine Terminal, and Trade Point Atlantic, all within a 5-minute drive of this property. So the Port of Baltimore processed 53 million tons of cargo in 2023, 650,000 shipping containers. It is the #1 port in the nation for the import-export of automobiles, and it handled almost 850,000 vehicles in 2023. It's also the closest port to Chicago, if you can believe that. And then what I mentioned earlier about Trade Point Atlantic adding another 20,000 or so jobs, they're building out an area in the actual terminal called Coke Point, and that's going to create a double-decker train terminal with a deep sea berth for larger ships. And they think they're going to increase their container traffic, their seaborne container traffic, by 25%. So it's another 160,000 containers a year. And now I'll take you through a little bit of the visuals here and then some of the value add stuff I like to do. So before we bought it, we did our value add on the taxes, right? This is the 88 unit complex on the left. We have our 64 unit complex on the right. And the one on the left, we divided into 13 parcels and did the membership interest purchase. So there's value add #1, creating about $700,000 in value. Here's where the property is located in relation to downtown Baltimore. You have right here your Dundalk Marine Terminal, right here your Seagirt Marine Terminal, and then where it says Sparrows Point is where Trade Point Atlantic is. And then, of course, when you buy a property, you want to put not only your stamp on it, but do some CapEx to make physical improvements and make the property run better and have less repair and maintenance in the long run. So we always do roofs if they are needed. We did roofs here and in the last 3 buildings. As you saw on the first page, I like my branding and signage, but also the in-unit upgrades are helpful as well. So here's what we did. On the left side, it looks disgusting, but that's also because there was a fire 6 days after we bought the property. The right side is what happened when we rebuilt the units and the building and also added washer dryers. So those washer dryers increased our rent about $150 a month, which is about 15%, and was a 38% yield on cost. The next one we did was there was 1 unit in this building that was 2 units combined into one. So it was a 2-bed, 2-bath, and it was rented for $950 a month. So we subdivided it, added washer dryers, and increased our rents 230% with a 54% yield on cost. Those are highly accretive numbers when you can do them at scale when you're buying at 6 or 7% cap rates. So that's the bulk of my presentation. There's a little bit more about myself and my contact information. If you have any questions about real estate investing, the market, Baltimore, multifamily, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Andrew. Our next speaker is Mr. Vipin Makija. Mr. Makija is a product leader and entrepreneur with over 15 years of experience driving innovation in both startups and large companies. He's the founder of Cast, a mobile AI platform helping real estate professionals grow their business by enhancing client engagement and streamlining operations. Vipin also mentors at top startup accelerators, judges MIT entrepreneurship competitions, and advises early-stage founders. His strength lies in turning emerging tech trends into impactful, user-focused situations. Vipin, you have the floor for the next 10 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Just give me one moment. And could you confirm if you can see my screen share?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me on the panel. This has already been quite insightful, and I hope to continue that with the presentation here. So, hi everyone, I'm Vipin Makija. I'm a product builder and founder, and someone who spent the last 15 years developing consumer and business data products and platforms. And through all of that, one belief has stayed constant with me. It's that the most powerful systems and products are the ones that support human connection. Even as we build the smartest of tools using AI, real estate as an industry will always be deeply human, because this isn't just about buying and selling property. It's about timing, trust, and major life transitions in many cases. And most people don't want to go through that alone. They want a guide, a steady voice perhaps, someone who understands their context, someone who understands perhaps the biases that were spoken about in the earlier discussion. That's why I believe the future of real estate does not remove the human. In fact, it relies on them, just in new, smarter, and perhaps more sustainable ways. Let's talk about one of the most critical humans in this experience, the real estate agent. Despite all the talk of disruption and automation, over 85% of residential transactions in the US still involve our friendly real estate agent. Let's take one showcased here. Let's call him John, a Long Island-based agent with 8 years of experience, one of more than 1.5 million licensed agents in the US today. Now, John wears a billion hats. He's a marketer, he's a negotiator, he coordinates transactions, he's a lead generator, he's also a therapist in some cases. He's still standing, but the ground under him is shifting a little bit. Margins are shrinking, client expectations are rising. On top of that, as a solopreneur, he's juggling multiple disconnected tools and platforms that don't talk to each other and are pricey. Now, a lot of people today are asking, do we even need agents anymore? And I think that's the wrong question. We spoke to more than 400 agents, buyers, sellers, investors, and we believe the real opportunity isn't to replace them. It's to reimagine what's possible when they're truly supported. That's why John is the hero of our story and of the presentation, because we believe agents like him, the ones on the ground, close to the client and all the action, will continue to be important players in the industry. And when agents like John have the power, everybody wins. Also, we'll look at how AI done right will elevate the entire experience for everyone involved. Now let's talk about the other side of the equation. That's the modern real estate client. Today's buyers and sellers move faster. They do more research and expect more, long before they even speak to an agent. 64%, in fact, expect an instant response from their agents. And mind-bogglingly, 80% will go to the first or second agent, or go with the first or second agent they speak to. But it's not just about the speed, because they're not waiting for properties and listings. They're scrolling Zillow while watching Netflix. They expect personalized recommendations and engagement in today's world. And what if that experience doesn't feel relevant to them? Well, they'll happily ghost the real estate agent. They also expect more than ever. So it's not just about speed. Modern clients expect more from the people they choose to work with. Sellers want agents to show value even before a contract is signed, not just someone to stick a sign in the yard. They'll ask people like John, hey John, what's your plan? How will you market my home? Why should I work with you and not the other agents? They want someone who gets their lifestyle, not just and for buyers, somebody who gets the lifestyle, not just a budget. They want to feel guided and not pushed. All of this plays out across marketing channels, social, email, text, and even video these days. So if an agent's relying on outdated methods, they're essentially invisible to today's client. Speed will get you noticed, and the value you offer as an agent is going to earn you their trust. So let's go back to John. Now, John's doing everything he can to keep up, but the job's not what it used to be. Today's agent is being asked to do more, as I mentioned, in less time, but still with the idea of building those long-term relationships. He's juggling leads and appointments and marketing while trying to stay visible online. And he's doing all of that as a solopreneur, essentially, without a large team or any team at all, without enough time or tools that work together. So the agents to thrive will have to be fast, they'll have to be strategic, they'll have to be human, so they never drop the ball. That's the pressure situation agents like John are living in. And this pace, we don't think is sustainable, not without some help anyway. So, what does it mean for agents who want to evolve? We believe there are 3 key shifts that they need to embrace more strongly if they want to be successful in 2025 and beyond. Number 1, they need to anticipate client needs proactively and not respond to them. Not waiting for leads to raise their hand, but sensing when life is shifting. It's about timing and being relevant. Number 2, very crucial, agents have always had local knowledge of their neighborhoods and their states and their cities, but now they must layer in real-time insights, market signals, buyer behavior, even block-by-block nuances. Stuff that will turn John into a go-to expert, not just for listings, but also for lifestyle. Full cycle life service. For agents, it's now more than just a transaction. It's about staying useful long after and being that trusted advisor. Equity updates, smart follow-ups, seasonal advice. John must become that trusted advisor that clients return to again and again. Let's get a little techie here. And let's take this one step further. What if the agent of tomorrow could sense a move before the client even realizes it? That's the idea behind intent signals. Not just reacting to clicks or emails, but picking up on subtle patterns that suggest life is shifting for their clients. So imagine this, a client's commute has doubled. Maybe they're bookmarking remote jobs. Perhaps school district searches in the area are popping up more. Maybe people are paying more attention to listings with more outdoor spaces. Now, these aren't obvious signals all the time, but they often precede big life decisions. Imagine John, if he doesn't have to guess, if he gets just a quick, quiet nudge, hey, something's changing, might be time to check in. Now, that's not just smart, it's also empathetic. And that is where we think the world is heading. A future where great agents don't just sell more, but they also sense more. So once agents detect that early intent, let's say through the power of AI, everything about how they engage starts to shift. We move from mass marketing as we know it today to micro signals, to something smaller, micro moments, I should say, to something smaller, smarter, and more timely. And then they follow a simple rhythm. You surface the intent early, even if it's subtle. You understand the timing and the context, why people are looking to buy, or why they're going through those life-shifting decisions. And then you deliver that hyper-personal value, as I mentioned earlier, not generic, but something that feels made for them. And over time, you learn and adapt. So each interaction with your buyers and sellers and investors will make the next interaction smarter. This is what I believe modern client engagement is going to look like. Not just more tools, not just louder ads, the right message for the right client in the right moment.
So Wei-Peng, you have about 2 minutes. Thank you.
Right. Let's bring this to life with a simple example. Meet Sam, a past client of John. Right? They haven't talked in a while, and Sam may not be ready just yet to sell his current place, but John is able to surface the intent. Right? Perhaps Sam's partner got a new job in a different part of the neighborhood. Right? Perhaps they're saving YouTube videos on how to prep your home for resale. Sam's not in the market yet, but he's thinking. And data shows that he checks his email late at night, which is when John reaches out, right? So John gets a system nudge saying, hey, something's changing. It's time to send a curated listing to Sam, right? Not filtered by price, but filtered by lifestyle. And then you continue to learn and adapt as Sam responds to your messages. This is what intent and empathy align, and that's how it looks like. Now, how do agents actually grow into this future? Let me just go back here. Truth is, agents are not going to become AI powered overnight. This is a journey that starts with being an explorer, perhaps using ChatGPT, right, to write a listing description, or maybe making a social media, to a practitioner where they're using it to save time, automated reminders and follow-ups, to an analyst where they actually dive deeper and find insights into why people want to make some decisions, to an automator where they build systems that work in the background and send out personalized notifications and personalized communication, to finally a visionary where they offer something rare, an experience that feels personal, predictive, and at scale, right? So they're not responding, they're anticipating. And this is what we believe is needed to turn them into more valuable, more human, and more trusted advisors than ever before. Finally, let's zoom back out for a second, because this isn't just about agents, and it's not just about AI. This is about the people buying homes, selling them, starting families, relocating for work, letting go of the house they grew up in, right? Real estate is full of emotional, high-stakes moments, and most people don't want to navigate those alone. They want a guide, a voice of reason, as I mentioned earlier, a human they can trust, especially when everything else feels uncertain. That's why I believe the future isn't human-less or agent-less, it's agent-elevated. And when agents get the right support, we don't just make their jobs easier, we make the experience better, more human for everybody involved. Thanks again for having me. This conversation is close to what we're building at Cast, a mobile AI-powered platform helping agents deliver human client experiences. We're still very early in bootstrapping, but excited about the future. And if anything I shared here resonated with you, I'd love to stay connected. I'll drop my LinkedIn in the chat box here. I'm active in the startup AI and real estate tech communities in New York, and I hope to see you guys around. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Wei-Peng. Our next speaker is Mr. Giga Zukubaya. Mr. Zukubaya is an experienced finance professional with a global background. He started his career in Asia as a financial analyst, gaining deep insights into financial markets and global trends. He also contributed to carbon credit research, supporting sustainable finance. In the US, he worked in the top credit analytics and bank mergers and acquisition valuations team, and earned his graduate degree from Columbia University. Currently, he is the CFO of Nordam, where he leads financial strategy and innovation. Giga, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. Welcome.
Hey everybody, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we could.
Great. So just to kick it off, my name is Giga. I am a CFO at Nordam. My background is in valuations, crypto, and blockchain, and we're building infrastructure to support digital asset trading and potentially tokenized securities as well. So as we're diving into discussion for tokenized real estate, let's first talk about the problems within the traditional real estate. First of all, high barriers to entry. Real estate usually requires a lot of upfront capital, which means most people simply can't afford to get involved. Next, we have liquidity or the lack of it. Selling a property isn't quick. It can take months, and during the time, your money is tied up. And there is the complexity and cost between all the legal paperwork, brokers, lawyers, and other middlemen real estate transactions are not only complicated, they're expensive as well. And there is another issue to be able to access the market. A lot of real estate opportunities are only available to local investors or people with the right connections. And that locks out a huge portion of potential participants, especially from global perspective. And finally, ownership structures. If you ever try to manage a fractional ownership the traditional way, you know it's messy, it's inefficient, and often lacks transparency. So what exactly is real estate tokenization? Simply put, it's a process of turning a real world property into digital tokens on a blockchain. Each token represents a share of ownership in the property, kind of like owning a slice of the building. These tokens can be traded, sold, or even used as collateral, just like any other digital asset. And now there are two types of tokens we usually talk about: NFTs and fungible tokens. NFTs are a great way. Great when you want to represent an entire property or a unique bundle of properties as one token. And then on the other hand, fungible tokens are better when you're dividing a single asset into many identical shares, like turning one property into 100 equal tokens. And here we have 5 different types of real estate tokens. First, simple tokenized real estate. This is the most straightforward: one property, one token, or set of tokens, all recorded on a blockchain. Then we have dynamic tokenized real estate. This uses smart contracts to update things like ownership, valuation, or even utility data in real time, such as replacement of the roof. Next is fractionalized real estate. Here, a single property is broken down into smaller ownership shares, so multiple investors can each own the piece of the asset. And tokenized cash flows are also another form of tokenized real estate. Instead of owning the property, investors can buy tokens tied specifically to income it generates, like rent, which also can be traded separately. And finally, tokenized real estate baskets. This is when one token represents a mix of multiple properties, like mini real estate portfolio wrapped into a single asset. How blockchain and fintech can enable tokenization. First, fractional ownership and liquidity. Tokenization lets us break down high value properties into smaller tradable tokens. This means more people can invest and it's easier to buy or sell shares, which makes the market more liquid. Then we have smart contracts and automation. These are self-executing agreements on the blockchain that handle everything from transfer to payouts. They cut out the middleman and reduce both time and cost. Then we have transparency and security. Since everything recorded on immutable ledger, you get tamper-proof history of ownership and transactions, which helps reduce fraud and build trust. On the compliance side, there are fintech tools that can help automate things like KYC, AML, and regulatory reporting, which is huge for staying compliant in a complex environment. And finally, trading platforms. These open up opportunities for peer-to-peer trading, lending, and even borrowing against tokenized real estate, creating more flexibility and financial access for everyone. So here are some quick stats. McKinsey estimates that total volume of tokenized digital securities could hit 5 trillion by 2030. In real estate specifically, the market was valued at around 2.7 back in 2022. But according to BCG, we're looking at a potential growth to 16 trillion by 2030. And investors are paying attention. Like EY survey from May 2023 found that 80% of high net worth individuals and 67% of institutions either already invest or plan to invest in tokenized assets. And by 2026, institutions expect to allocate around 6% of the portfolio, and where high net worth individuals are targeting around 9%. Here's one of the first real estate token projects, Aspen Coin. It's located in Colorado. The owners decided to fractionalize the property using the blockchain and issued Aspen token, which were security tokens built on Ethereum itself. The company behind the project's elevated returns, it offered 19% of the property to investors with a minimum investment of $10,000. Instead of buying traditional shares, investors purchased this Aspen coins, giving them partial ownership of the resort, along with the potential profit sharing as well with dividends. And they raised around 18 million through the sale, making it one of the earliest large-scale examples of real estate tokenization in action. There's another great example, Realty, a platform that specializes in fractionalizing rental properties, mainly across US. It allows investors from anywhere in the world to buy tokenized shares of these homes. And what's really interesting, their rental income is paid out daily or weekly to token holders, and it's done in stable coins like USDT or USDC. And most importantly, I mean, there are no brokers, no banks, no long delays. Everything is handled through blockchain-based smart contracts that automate revenue sharing and track ownership in real time. Here is the screenshot that I was able to get from Realty. Here we can see that their properties listed for sale, and they're divided up by tokens, and we see here expected yield and payments to be made in tokens as well. Dubai is also taking bold steps in this space. Dubai Land Development Department, along with the Dubai Future Foundation and BARA, has launched a pilot project to tokenize real estate assets. The goal is to make the market more inclusive, liquid, and efficient while also attracting global investors. They're aiming big. Projections suggest that tokenized assets could account for 16 billion or about 7% of real estate transactions in Dubai by 2033. Here we have other projects and other platforms as well. These companies are leading the change in real estate tokenization and blockchain-based investing. They offer platforms for secure, compliant issuance and management of the tokenized assets, ranging from US and global rental properties to commercial real estate and security tokens. By blending blockchain, smart contracts, and crowdfunding, they're making real estate investment more accessible and liquid and more efficient. Okay, let's go over this quickly. So the tokenization process. First, you need to decide how ownership will be structured. There are a few models to choose from, whether it's equity tokenization, whether it's debt tokenization, or even revenue sharing model. And special purpose vehicles or REITs might have to get involved to comply with the regulations here in the US. There is property valuation, due diligence, token creation, smart contracts. Like once the groundwork is done, you move on creating the token and setting up the smart contracts on the blockchain. It's usually done either on Ethereum or Polygon protocols itself. Then there is compliance investor onboarding. You gotta comply with KYC, AML to verify the identities. There's a token sale distribution part where either it's through a security token offering or ICO or even a private placement. Then we have secondary market trading and liquidity. After the sale, tokens can often be traded on licensed exchanges to provide liquidity. Some tokens may have lockup periods or resale restrictions. And thereafter, we have ongoing management, investor relations. And then comes the property sale and token redemptions. When the property is sold, token holders get their proportional share of the profits or losses. And some platforms even support automated buyouts, allowing investors to sell tokens back to the issuer or another party.
So Giga, you have 2 minutes left.
Great. So then we have benefits of real estate tokenization. We have increased liquidity, lower costs, faster transactions, reduced fraud, fractional ownership, transparency, and better price discovery, especially with the fractional ownership. Then, of course, tokenization is without its challenges. Here are a few key ones to keep in mind. Regulatory uncertainty. The legal landscape varies a lot from country to country. That creates complexity when trying to structure a tokenized offering that are fully compliant. Then we had liquidity issues. There is also some security concerns and investor protection from KYC and AML processes to make sure that the sale and ownership is legal and compliant with the laws. Looking ahead, here's what's driving future of real estate tokenization. First, we have mass adoption and institutional growth. Second, we have better regulatory clarity here, especially in the US, which is expected to come in the later second half of the year. Third, we have enhanced liquidity through the new marketplaces. And lastly, increased accessibility through fractional ownership here in the US and outside of the US as well. To wrap it up, let's talk where it's all heading and the role of crypto exchanges might play. Crypto exchanges could become the future of trading hubs for tokenized real estate. Just like we trade cryptocurrencies today, we might one day see entire real estate portfolios from single properties. The global REITs traded seamlessly on exchanges. Their security token offerings, or STOs, are also quickly gaining momentum because they offer a compliant regulatory way to raise capital, blending the transparency of blockchain with the legal protection and traditional finance. So what's the takeaway? Fintechs and blockchain aren't just changing how we invest, they're shaping the very foundation of real estate finance. The shift is already happening, and for those of us who are in crypto, real estate, and finance, it's time to lean in and help shape what comes next. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Giga. So just as a quick reminder, in the chat, you can find the LinkedIn that Vipin kindly left. Thank you, Vipin, for leaving this information. So our next speaker is Mr. Adnan Qadari. Mr. Qadari is an experienced director in financial services with a strong track record in launching businesses and managing profit and loss. He has extensive global client-facing experience, particularly in structuring financing solutions for top hedge fund and institutional clients across fixed income and equity products. His background also includes expertise in counterparty risk management and proprietary trading in products like corporate bond, municipal bonds, CDS, and interest rate swaps. So with a focus on relative value strategies. So Adnan, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. Thank you for coming. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity. I am going to keep my video turned off because I'm having some bandwidth issues, but let's get started. Good afternoon again. While the focus of today's sessions have been in real estate and technology, in the next 10 minutes, we'll switch gears a little bit to another alt asset class, hedge funds. I'll draw some comparisons on performance with REITs and public equity, which will hopefully be complementary and insightful. This is an adjacent topic, and so let's get started. We will start off in the next slides by looking at a structure as an introductory, essentially a structure of hedge funds, the costs of investing in hedge funds, the investor criteria, sizes, strategies, and comparative performance of hedge funds with traditional asset classes. And then we'll finally touch on the impact of technology in this space. Hedge funds as an asset class have grown from about 1 trillion assets under management in 2005 to now about 5.7 trillion as of mid-2024 data. In comparison, the public equity REIT market is around 1.8 trillion, and the private real estate funds are around 13 trillion. Obviously, the direct real estate, residential, and commercial markets much bigger. Okay, we'll jump first into the legal structure of hedge funds. A typical legal structure for hedge funds is an LP-GP structure. What that means is GP is a general partner. It's the investment managers or portfolio managers. They are the fiduciary. They're obligated to act in the best interest of the investors, who are the LP or limited partners. General partners can be held personally liable for fraud or negligence, for example. They could have unlimited liability, and any legal structure could pierce through the veil and go after the general partner in such situations. Limited partners are the investors. They're liable only up to their investment amount. The fund vehicles are structured in a master feeder structure, meaning investor pools are separated into offshore investors and onshore investors for US tax purposes, for example. And from those feeder funds, you can see in the picture here, from those feeder funds, The capital is allocated to the master fund, where investments are made into stocks, bonds, derivatives, etc. And then returns are dividend back up to the feeders when clients would look to redeem their investments. In terms of the investor base, so a typical mutual fund ETF or a REIT, this is a retail product. All of us here can invest in that product. They're typically exchange listed. We can go to our broker and purchase. Hedge funds are primarily, on the other hand, an institutional product. They primarily target institutional investors to raise capital, such as pension funds, endowments, foundations, sovereign wealth funds. And in the retail space, it's only qualified retail investors, high net worth individuals. There's criteria for them, such as a minimum $1 million worth of net worth. There are also income thresholds, such as 200 or 300,000 to qualify and invest into a hedge fund. And you'd have to access the hedge fund shares through a private wealth management platform or a fund of funds. A fund of fund is essentially where an allocator diversifies the investments of hedge funds into multiple hedge fund strategies. And so you have a more diversified view into the hedge fund space as opposed to investing in one hedge fund. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the size and distribution of hedge funds to provide a flavor of how the industry is headed. We talked about the growth in assets from about 1 trillion to 5.78 trillion over the last 20 years. But the industry has gotten very concentrated as the industry is maturing, which means that in the hedge fund index, in Barclays hedge fund index, there are about 2,500 funds that report their monthly returns. Off that index, 8% of the funds control about 70% rounded up assets. So of the 5.7 trillion, 4 trillion of the assets are controlled by 8% of the funds. And those funds are typically 1 billion or larger in size. Some of the larger ones are 20 billion, 40 billion, 60 billion, et cetera, in terms of sizes. Whereas the smaller funds, which are 100 million or less, they're 62% in terms of numbers, but they only control about 250 billion of that 5.8 trillion. So the industry is getting concentrated, and there are definitely differentiators, specialists. There are funds that consistently outperform versus funds that have more volatility in their performance. Next, let's step back a little bit again with the structure of hedge funds in terms of liquidity. If we buy stocks, as we know, we could just, if we needed money and we could sell it tomorrow in the market, redeem it. That is not the case for hedge funds, which is why it is more of an institutional product and for high net worth individuals who may not need immediate liquidity. So here you have a comparison of redemption frequency. So mutual funds, ETFs, they're daily. Hedge funds have terms such as redemption frequency. It could be monthly, but the standard is quarterly, meaning you can only take out your money once every quarter. There could be things such as lockup periods and notice periods. You may have to give 90-day notice to take out your money on a quarterly schedule. There could be lockup periods where you cannot take out your initial investments for 1 to 3 years. So if I invest in 2024, if there's a 2-year lockup, I cannot take out any money until 2026. And even then, I'd have to give a 90-day notice and wait for the next quarterly redemption cycle date. They could put up gates. So if a hedge fund is invested in less liquid assets and markets are volatile, which is also a time when investors might need liquidity, need money. At that time, hedge funds can put up gates and restrict the redemption, right? There are also gates where they say the redemption could be 25% per quarter. So you cannot take out all of the money at one time. So that shows that there's a significant liquidity profile to investors. I'm not talking about liquidity of the portfolios. That's another issue. Hedge fund investments could be less liquid, but even the liquidity available to the investors is significantly less than other asset classes. And this slide sort of touches on that. The costs are higher, whereas expense ratio in an ETF could be 16 basis points or lower. Mutual funds could be a little bit higher than ETFs. In hedge funds, the first 2% of your investments go to cover management fees, And then any upside on top of that, the hedge fund can keep 10 to 20% of that upside before you get your return. So to do a simple an example, if an investor in a hedge fund the hedge fund has had 15% gross return, the investor is actually going to receive 10.4% net return after paying for the 2% management fee and 20% performance fee on that remaining 13% upside. So as you can see, you're giving up, in this example, close to a third of the returns to the hedge fund. Okay. I think the next topic is we cover some different strategies and their risk-weighted returns. What is the riskiness versus the return? And we compare it with something like the S&P 500 indexing or REIT. So some strategies here are equity hedge, meaning this is long short equity or market neutral equity. Unlike indexing where you're long S&P or long NASDAQ or long QQQ, it's just you're long essentially fundamental research driven or quantitative research driven long and short portfolios. That's what equity hedges. Event driven are mergers and acquisitions, bankruptcies, or corporate events. So those strategies go after particular events where there will be a jump in securities prices. Macro bets on interest rates, currencies, and geopolitics. Relative values, arbitrage or mispricing between related long short securities. Credit is essentially investments in corporate bonds and structured debt instruments. And multi-strat is essentially where in a multi-strat hedge fund, they take a combination and allocate a percentage of into each of these different strategies. And this is a high level. There are many, many sub-strategies. This is just a high level overview. But a multi-strat is essentially like a mini fund of funds, so to speak, where you invest, where essentially management decides on optimizing their portfolio's risk and return by allocating into different hedge fund strategy, all in-house. And then there's CTA, which invests in futures and options and commodities. And I'm including it here because this asset class, this particular strategy has less correlation and is diversifying within a hedge fund portfolio.
So Adnan, you have about 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Sounds good. So if you look here, the two key things that I want to show is that hedge funds, Sharpe ratio, which is excess return divided by volatility. Hedge funds show superior Sharpe ratio at 1.3 versus the S&P at 0.8, REITs at 0.6. And others peak to trough loss. Like today, we're experiencing pain with the NASDAQ down 20% from peak to trough. During any crisis scenarios, we have seen the S&P typically have 30 to 40% loss from peak to trough, whereas a typical hedge fund is under 20%. Typical hedge fund strategy is under 20%. So there's risk reward principles, and this is what attracts also institutional investors to allocate a portion of their investments into funds. So next, I think here again in this particular table, I show the various drawdowns during various market crisis scenarios, starting with the Russian crisis, down to the global financial crisis and COVID and pandemic. All of those crises, you can see consistently that the HFRI hedge fund index has had less losses in the severe market turmoil periods than the S&P 500 or the REITs or a property index, which of course is not a good comparison because these are appraisal-based indices and smooth data, but nonetheless, to give you some flavor. The other point I wanted to make is there is significant dispersion among hedge funds. Just like securities, when you're investing in stocks, you have to do your due diligence on a fund to ensure that you're investing in hedge funds that have better portfolio managers and a track record of alpha generation. And last 30 seconds or so, I will try to touch on essentially everything in AI and ML hedge funds are early adopters. To give you a flavor, JP Morgan is investing $17 billion of its revenue, or 10% of its revenue in tech budget. They're investing heavily in AI, in ML, or even things as advanced as quantum computing, which are still not yet fully practical. So to give you a flavor, in signal generation, natural language processing is used to mine insights from earnings calls, quarterly filings, derive sentiment even from management tone on earnings calls. This is before it was done by humans. It's going to be done by machines more and more. They're leveraging on alternative data, such as satellite images of car parking lots or mobile app usage to forecast retail sales ahead of traditional data. So these are called high frequency data that's used to do better, more faster and more specific earnings forecasts around their companies where they're investing, both stocks and bonds. And then in risk management, machine learning is used, for example, in value at risk. For Monte Carlo simulation, you can use machine learning enhanced volatility forecasting to generate more scenarios, more tail events, and have better risk forecasting, so to speak. Liquidity modeling is done to look at crowded trades. For example, when everyone is selling at the same time, you're going to have larger losses. So hedge funds are very aware in their strategies of crowdedness of their strategies and security selection. Operationally, there's robotic process automation that's coming more and more. So I think people have talked about smart contracts and other such earlier in the presentations. It's coming in our space as well. Stocks are now settling on T+1 versus T+2 a year ago. And in the future, not near term, if you have same day settlement, you're going to have to look at this newer strategies. And finally, on the client-facing side, there are deployment of AI chatbots to handle investor queries, customizable dashboards for real-time insights on performance of their portfolios. Performance attribution, it can be more accurate with machine learning, or at least provide another flavor, another view on what's driving their performance, outperformance, or underperformance. And natural language selection can create reports and commentaries for clients. So significant savings when these technologies mature and are used more effectively. And in closing, I would basically say that hedge funds, they offer superior risk-adjusted return. If you want it, so you're definitely not going to make 20% year over year when you have a bull run like we did with the S&P in 23 and 24. But on a volatility-adjusted return, hedge funds, when selected properly, can offer superior risk-reward. Portfolio allocation, again, they prefer better downside protection during big market drawdowns. They are investing heavily in technology. We've talked about that. And in terms of folks looking for careers in finance, demand is rising for data science and quantitative talent. So if you can balance those, there's space. Thank you very much for your time and allowing me to digress a little bit from the topic today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adnan. And many thanks to all of our 5 speakers for sharing your insights on real estate market, on emerging technologies and AI. So I'd like to use the next 10 to 15 minutes for a Q&A session. So if you have a question, please kindly unmute yourself. And also, please, tell us whom the question is for. Who would like to give the first question? Andrew, go ahead. You are unmuted, Andrew.
Sorry. Okay. I'll always have a question, so you can't leave it open-ended like that. So I have a question that kind of fits a couple of the speakers here, so they can jump in as necessary. So thinking about Giga's presentation on the tokenization of real estate, I know that there are advances in tokenization of hedge funds, and one of the primary barriers is the high entry costs. I wondered, Adnan and Giga and Vipin and any of the other panelists, if you see this as just a very niche part of the market, where you think there might be significant opportunities here to tokenize your investment and get smaller scale investors into hedge funds.
I think it's a very small part, very niche of the market at this moment. But at the same time, I mean, most importantly, when the regulation comes in and when it's clear, and when investors and smart contract creators, they're able to kind of like have this infrastructure in place, I think it will be a big part of the real estate market itself, whether it's through hedge funds, through fractionalization, or through real estate token baskets as well.
Thank you, Giga. Thank you, Andrew. Do we have more questions? So I have one question here. possibly for Andrew. So in your opinion, how do you see the impact of what we call economic policy uncertainty on the real estate market? I mean, today, obviously, we saw the high volatility in the stock market, obviously triggered by this economic policy. So in your opinion, what's the potential impact of economic policy uncertainty on the commercial and the real estate market?
I think it's a really broad question, so why don't I focus it on the little tiny part that I'm better at? So apartments, right? If costs go up too much due to inflation and tariffs, people may not have jobs. If costs go up, then it's going to be more expensive to provide CapEx and repairs and maintenance to your buildings. It also would be significantly more expensive to construct new buildings, so that'll put an end to new supply. I don't see a net positive coming from what's being discussed. Hopefully it's a negotiating tactic to get tariffs against us dropped around the world. But overall, I don't see a positive for us by implementing tariffs and actually following through with them. So on the residential side, I think it just leads to more costs and less jobs. As it pertains to office or industrial, retail, those really aren't my cup of tea, so I can't really opine on that.
So just a follow-up, do you think this can affect demand side as well? Supply side, the cost will go up, as you said. What about demand side? Do you think is there any significant impact?
Well, again, in my universe, right, I think it could affect demand because people always need a place to live. It's whether they have a paycheck or not to pay for it. So especially in my region, right, I mentioned that there are 3 major shipping terminals directly across the street from my property. You know, if trade stops coming into the U.S. at one of the largest ports, and then one of the other things that I mentioned was that 70% of the traffic that comes through that terminal its destination is within 70 miles of the port. So you're talking about an industrial area that could lose jobs. If they lose jobs, how are the people that do need places to live, how are they going to afford to live in my buildings? So yeah, it could definitely affect the demand side.
Michael, if you don't mind, let me remind our participants that we have 2 wonderful graduates of Hofstra. Andrew is an expert in real estate, a graduate from Hofstra, and Giga is an expert in blockchain. In fact, Giga is a certified blockchain from IBM. Giga, if you don't mind, to inspire some of our students, if you don't mind, if it's not, too private, can you talk about your company, the company that, it's kind of startup and you went to Miami to attend a conference? Can you update us about the company?
Yes, definitely. So, for the regulatory landscape, right, as it's changing, as it's US becoming more like crypto friendly and crypto capital, we have, as a team, decided to launch a crypto exchange in the US and outside of the US as well. And it's been quite challenging in the way that there's so many regulations you have to adhere to make sure that you get the money transmitter license and all that. But the most important thing, I think there is a room to capitalize on broader, like loose regulations on crypto that might be coming on the way, which the crypto task force is expected to unveil Q3 2025, and having broader kind of reach, being able to offer crypto exchange services to other retail investors around the US, making the UI more kind of like intuitive. I think there is the opportunity to be able to grasp the market share that's been growing and is expected to grow.
Excellent. Thank you. And we had wonderful speakers. All the speakers, from keynote to the speakers, were wonderful. Honestly, I enjoyed it so much. And I'm sure my students from investment class that are here, I enjoyed it. And so back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Isang. So let's see, do we have more questions from the audience? So Adnan, I have a question actually related to the ESG or sustainability. We have at Hofstra, at the finance department, we have a sustainability 2, actually, one undergrad, another grad level sustainability courses. So in your opinion, how do you see in the next few years the integration of sustainability and ESG factors in the investment process. What's your take on that? So Adnan? Well, I think Adnan is, currently not there. So what? Yeah.
I have a question for Giga. This is Mitchell Sapchon. I'm a Hofstra graduate. I've been in the investment business, both on Wall Street and in real estate for 4 decades. Question for Giga, not that we can stand in the way of tokenization of all illiquid investments. I mean, the future will bring what the future brings, but won't tokenization and the creation of the ability to trade more liquid alternative investments have ultimately a negative impact on overall portfolio construction? One of the basic theories of investment is not to have, and we discussed it earlier today, not to invest in a single investment, to have diversification.
I have colleagues advocating so strongly on their behalf to speak on the call. Definitely builds confidence.
I'm waiting for Adnan. And effectively, you lose diversification if you have a portfolio that is constructed with highly correlated investments. And once you have what has been, traditionally alternative asset classes that do not move with a high correlation with traditional asset classes, once you have those alternative asset classes start to have a higher correlation, start to have beta with the overall market, then you lose that benefit in portfolio construction. And do you see that as a potential outcome of tokenization?
I think that's one of the outcomes. That's definitely a possibility. But on the other hand, the way I think about it is the price discovery. Because like the real estate is so illiquid, it's really hard to pin down the price of the real estate building or an apartment. I mean, there are comparables, yes, of course, but at the same time, who is someone else willing to pay for the property itself? And being able to kind of like fractionalize the real estate, either portfolio or real estate building commercial by CRE, it really brings in the value. And also on the other hand, I mean, we do have REITs, and REITs are somewhat part of the overall portfolio as well, but for many companies and for many individuals. And I'm not really sure what impact it had on the general diversification portfolio itself, but I see the point where there is a correlation between the general market and the REITs as well. So that will be potentially expanded into tokenized real estate as well. Definitely.
I would just point out that NAREIT itself, the National Association of Real Estate Investment Trusts, does in its own research point out a much higher correlation with the S&P 500 with New York Stock Exchange listed REITs compared with hard real estate assets and through pension ownership of using pension ownership of hard real estate assets. So there is a very real difference between securitized real estate in the form of REIT shares and ownership of LP interests in illiquid assets. So and that's why I foresee tokenization impacting ownership of real estate and its correlation and its place in portfolio construction. And by the way, I see that with other alternative asset classes, not simply real estate.
Definitely. I mean, yes, with the tokenization, there is increased risk for it be more correlated to the general market and being less of a diversification mechanism itself. Agree on that.
Yeah, thank you all for this great discussion. So now I'd like to hand over to Dr. Ihsan Iqbal, and Dr. Andrew Spiller for closing remarks. Dr. Nickelbach is the CV Star Distinguished Professor in Finance and International Financial Services and the Professor of Finance at Hofstra University. Dr. Andrew Spiller is the Robert F. Dow Distinguished Professor in Business and Professor of Finance at Hofstra University. Lisa?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. This was wonderful. So allow me to turn it over to Andrew to give his closing remarks. I truly enjoyed it. Thank you all. Andrew?
Thank you, Asan, and thank you, Mike, for your excellent moderation. Thanks. First, a few thank yous to all the panelists who took their time during this very turbulent financial crisis that seems to be enveloping. So I know you have a lot of things to think about, and you're juggling many responsibilities. So we really do appreciate your commitment. I learned a lot, and I think all of our students and participants did, and it just shows how much integration and change we can expect. I also want to thank, of course, the center, the Zarb School, Dean Viswanathan, Vice Dean Viswanathan for being here to introduce the keynote, Kent Baker, our keynote speaker, Ashira for coordinating everything on the law school side, and of course, Laura Feder for doing all of the things behind the scenes that are very time consuming, and she makes everything so easy and seamless. So once again, I want to thank especially our alumni. We love to bring back our alumni and have them share their thoughts. And as we end this 18th consecutive conference, we hope for 18 more conferences. That's the plan, is to keep bringing back all of these excellent thought leaders and generating new information for our students and alumni, faculty, staff, and the community. And with that, we will end the program. Thank you all so much again for attending.